Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful. I should have you all here on Sunday. That was a fabulous response. Thank you. I'm the rector here at Christ Episcopal Church, Peter Homeyer, and it's my good pleasure to welcome you to our opening concert of the second year of the Great Lady Concert Series. This concert series is inspired by Ruby, our Steinway grand piano, which, thank you to a fabulous, generous gift of Mr. Lynn Pickering, now calls Christ Church home. And we are so grateful not only for Mr. Lynn Pickering's gift, but for all the donations from this community and the city that underwrite this series, and all the hands that are going to provide you with a reception afterwards as well. I'd like to make sure that we thank our partners for their generous support at the Dayton Music Club, and remind you that this series is free thanks to the donations of not only our members, but those who choose to attend. There is a box if you'd like to leave a gift that's towards the series, which is just outside the sanctuary. A couple of quick mechanical announcements before we get to the heart of our program today. The first is that if you're looking for the restrooms, you can get help from an usher immediately after you leave the sanctuary, but they're just to the left and right of the stair as you go out. There is a reception following in the parish hall, and it's as easy to find as not going in the restrooms or up or down the stairs, but going straight through that closet area, and that will bring you right out to where the line for the cookies and the punch are. So that's the perfect place to come out. And that there is a survey in today's program, both in this pink sheet and a QR code, depending on how savvy you are with technology. We would love to hear about how you found out about our series, what you enjoy about it, and that will help us with our future planning. And finally, a reminder that should you have your own noisemaker with you, to please silence it in preparation for our concert. With all of that out of the way, I hope you will join me in offering a warm welcome to our artists for our first concert in this year's series, the Ruckman Piano Duo. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this working well? Okay, good. It's a pleasure for Tiraje and me to play for you this afternoon, and we certainly appreciate being asked by Young Kim to perform on the Great Lady Concert Series. And of course, we appreciate your attendance here, especially on a rainy afternoon like today. At every concert that Tiraje and I have given together, I have always spoken a bit about each composer being performed. As I was growing up, my piano teacher, Audley Wasson, instilled in me a reverence for the composers. He was in awe of the great composers, regarding them, I believe, as conduits of beauty, capital B. As a result of his influence, I have always felt it helpful to provide a little context, a little background for each composer we play. And I hope you'll agree that this adds something to the listening experience. We'll be starting this afternoon with our longest and most serious work, the Schubert Fantasy for Piano Duet, and we'll conclude with our most carefree music, the Brahms Hungarian Rhapsodies. Dantis, my bad, also for duet. And between those bookends, we'll also play two solo masterpieces by Chopin. Until the advent of modern medicine, a number of the great composers died in what, from our vantage point, were premature deaths. Mozart, Bizet, Mendelssohn, Chopin, all dying in their 30s. The youngest among the great composers who died young was Franz Schubert, who lived only to the age of 31, after having composed over 1,500 works. Schubert was an unusually shy man. He was physically diminutive, just a shade over 5 feet tall. He was not good looking. He wore thick glasses, and he was especially awkward around women. He was extraordinarily gifted as a composer, however, particularly with the gift of melody. It is a cliche among classical musicians that Schubert's melodic inventiveness is singular in the entire history of music. If he was awake, he was probably composing, often grabbing napkins or whatever was nearby to jot down music that he did not want to lose. When Schubert was 21, he was hired to be music instructor for Carolyn Esterhazy, a daughter in the very wealthy Esterhazy family. Over a period of 10 years, Schubert served as Carolyn's piano instructor and frequently accompanied her at the piano as she sang. During this time, he fell deeply in love with Carolyn, although she never had any idea. As it turned out, she would be the great, though unrequited, love of his brief life. Piano duets involve 2 players at one piano, as opposed to a piano duo, which involves 2 pianos. Piano duets were a very popular social thing during the 19th century in Europe and in America. Writing easy-to-play piano duets was a means of making a little extra cash for composers who were capitalizing on the middle-class popularity of this new instrument, the piano. Every home had to have a piano, whether it was in the city or the country, and duets were a means of providing family entertainment. Many of these duets, as you might expect, were easily learned, but also easily forgettable. But not all of them were easily forgettable. Some were works of substance. Of all the piano duets ever written, the most profound and technically impressive is Schubert's Fantasy in F minor. He dedicated the Fantasy to Carolyn Esterhazy, something again of which he was to remain completely unaware. A fantasy for keyboard was a work in which the mood changes as the piece progresses. Schubert's Fantasy is a tragic piece in which Schubert pours out his feelings for Caroline, and in the process created an epic poem in music. It is the highest point in the piano duet repertoire and one of the great masterpieces, period, from the entire 19th century. The 19-minute Fantasy is played without interruption. Tiraje and I met at Juilliard a half-century ago, and as you might expect, we had many pianist friends at school at that time. What was true then has always been true and will probably forever be true at conservatories everywhere, is that you will hear Chopin being played in practice rooms at any time of day. Frédéric Chopin is rightly revered as the greatest composer for piano who has ever lived. No one, not even the great Franz Liszt, would plumb the depths of what the piano was capable of in the way that Chopin did. He wrote almost exclusively for piano. Chopin was Polish. He came from an upper-crust family in Warsaw. Like many other great composers, his compositional talent was evident when he was just a boy. He left Warsaw at the age of 20 to see what kind of life he could obtain in Paris. His talent was immediately recognized there. He had brought 2 piano concertos with him to Paris, written when he was just 18, and he was quickly acknowledged to be a master pianist and composer when they were performed, with himself as soloist. Chopin's reticence about performing in public, though, became a lifelong obstacle for him. It is one of the ironies of music history that the greatest composer for the piano, and a composer who would serve as an example of compositional perfection for subsequent generations, did not enjoy performing in public. He performed in public just 30 times. Chopin would write in many pianistic genres, calling his various piano pieces nocturnes or polonaises or preludes, scherzos, impromptus, waltzes, or mazurkas. He also wrote ballades, which as a category of his works is regarded with the highest esteem. His 4 ballades encapsulate everything that Chopin is known for. He took advantage of the extremes of the dynamic range possible in the piano, the softs and louds. He invented all kinds of pianistic figurations. He greatly enriched the harmonic vocabulary for all subsequent composers, regardless of instrument. He also set the bar very high for using the damper pedal, something that had never been done. He established an equality of right and left hand that had never been attempted. His music is a remarkable synthesis of perfect harmony, perfect melody, and perfect rhythm. One has to look very hard to find a single extraneous note in Chopin. Although always impeccably dressed and always networking among the wealthy, from whom he obtained many students, it took Aurore Dupin, who wrote under the pen name George Sand, the cigar-smoking, pants-wearing, famous female novelist and socialite, to directly approach Chopin and ultimately make him the center of her life. She recognized his genius. She regarded his tuberculosis, which he had dominated his entire life from the age of 17 on, as a challenge that both Chopin and she would endure together. They spent summer after summer at Nohant, the picturesque weeping willow-lined estate in central France that Sand had inherited and where Chopin composed every morning one masterpiece after another. You might be interested in Sand's description of Chopin's creative process. His creativity was spontaneous and miraculous. Pieces simply appeared in his mind suddenly and completely. But after initially hearing a new work in his mind, then would begin the most heartbreaking labor I have ever witnessed. He would shut himself up in his room for days at a time with his piano, weeping, pacing, slamming pens down on the table, repeating or changing a single measure 100 times, writing it and erasing it with equal frequency, and beginning again the next day at the very same spot with desperate perseverance. He would spend 6 weeks on a single page, only to end up writing it just as he had done when he first heard it in his mind. The third ballade, which I will play, was written at Nohant. It is written in sections which glide into each other seamlessly. Of the 4 ballades he wrote, it is the sunniest. And before I play, I need some water. barcarolle was a boat piece supposedly reminiscent of Venetian gondoliers and is characterized by a particular rhythm that is repeated throughout an entire piece. In addition to his ballades, nocturnes, and so on, Chopin also wrote half a dozen large-scale standalone pieces not belonging to any particular category. The greatest of these is the barcarolle, which would be the last large-scale piece he would write. Because of his tuberculosis, consumption, as it was called in those days, Chopin had literally been at death's door several times during his life, sometimes for months at a time. In the late 1840s, in his late 30s, his health was getting desperately worse. It is easy to imagine the barcarolle, this last piece, with its wistful tone and improvisatory nature, was for Chopin a farewell to life. If you had been the type of man to frequent the waterfront bordellos of Hamburg in 1850, you might have been surprised to hear and see an astonishing 17-year-old boy playing the piano in the parlor. What would have surprised you would not have been his presence there. All such establishments had piano players, some of them younger than 17. But what might have caught your attention was just how masterfully this young boy could play and improvise. Since Johannes Brahms had exhibited obvious musical talent as a young boy, his father sought to increase the meager family income by allowing his son to entertain this slice of life on the Hamburg docks. This young boy would ultimately become the most accomplished, most famous, most sought after, and most loved composer in the world. Like Chopin had done at the very same age, Brahms left Hamburg in 1853 at the age of 20, hoping to meet the great Robert Schumann, who lived 200 miles away in Dusseldorf. Schumann was a huge name in the classical music world. Brahms already knew every work Schumann had ever written, and there was no one he respected more from afar. Finding out where Schumann lived, he met the composer and his wife, the great concert pianist Clara Schumann, and performed for the two of them in their living room in a very long afternoon. Schumann was the publisher of an influential music journal, and he was so impressed with Brahms that in the very next issue of his journal, he announced that the 20-year-old Johannes Brahms from Hamburg was the long-awaited heir to Beethoven. Ever since Beethoven's death in 1827, there was a kind of Messiah-like hope that one day another genius of Beethoven's stature would arise. Brahms would prove Schumann correct. He would compose one acclaimed masterpiece after another until his death in 1897. Living right across the street from the Musikverein, Vienna's Carnegie Hall, where many of his works were premiered, Brahms became the most beloved and admired composer in Europe. At the start of his career, Brahms had made the acquaintance of a young Hungarian violinist. They performed quite a bit together, and while touring through Hungary, Brahms was introduced in a very thorough way to Hungarian music. The lively rhythms and dramatic contrasts he heard made a very strong impression on him. Shortly after this, Brahms wrote several Hungarian dances for solo piano, eventually largening them for piano duet in order to create a fuller sound. He would ultimately write 21 of these Hungarian dances, and they together have become another high point in all of the piano duet repertoire. We'll be playing 3 of them for you. French composer Georges Bizet, known for his opera Carmen, of course, also wrote piano music, and one of the works he wrote was for piano duet. It was a group of 12 pieces called Jeux d'enfants, meaning children's games, and the last piece in this bunch is called The Ball, meaning passing the ball. So we hope you enjoy it.